In April 2023, 22-year-old Darcy Schafer-Turner from Cronulla walked into what he thought was a lifeline, an offer to help clear a $50,000 drug debt. Instead, he walked straight into a deadly trap. Within days, Darcy was dead, suffocating on his own vomit in a Peakhurst apartment, and his body became the centerpiece of a chilling cover-up. Charles Dennis Turnbull, a 33-year-old Brisbane businessman with a hidden side as a professional cleaner, meticulously transported Darcy's remains in a metal cabinet to Worrell Creek. With $20,000 paid for the disposal, encrypted messages, and a calculated cleanup operation. This case exposes the dark machinery of Sydney's underworld, where desperation, debt and professional killers collide in deadly precision. The setup, friends, drugs, and a $50,000 problem. To understand how Darcy Schafer-Turner ended up dead inside a metal cabinet, you have to understand the kind of life he was living. Darcy was 22, from Cronulla, a young tradie who had slipped into Sydney's drug scene. He wasn't a big player, not a kingpin or part of any major network. He was one of those guys who lived between two worlds, working a normal job by day and dealing drugs by night, operating on the lower end of the criminal food chain. Among his friends was Zachary Richard Fraser, another 22-year-old who had grown up with him. The two shared the same circle, young men hustling drugs, taking risks, and getting caught up in small-time disputes that could quickly turn deadly when money was involved. These weren't sophisticated criminals running global operations. They were local boys chasing fast cash, often out of desperation. In a world where one wrong move could cost everything, somewhere along the line, a serious problem appeared, a $50,000 drug debt. Darcy owed Fraser, or maybe someone close to him, that amount. In the drug game, 50 grand isn't small change. It's the kind of debt that doesn't just disappear, it demands consequences. Whether Darcy had failed to sell product, stolen something, or gotten caught up in a bad deal didn't really matter. What mattered was that everyone believed he owed that money. And in the underworld, belief alone can be deadly. Fraser wasn't alone in this. There was another man involved, his identity still suppressed for legal reasons, but he played a critical role. Together, they saw an opportunity. They believed they had leverage over Darcy, that $50,000, and they decided to use it. The trap, an offer too good to refuse. By late April 2023, the two men came up with a plan. They reached out to Darcy, pretending to offer him a way out of his financial mess. They told him to come to their apartment in Peakhurst, in Sydney's southern suburbs. The pitch was simple. They had access to cocaine and needed someone to help move it. It sounded like a lifeline. A chance for Darcy to make quick money and finally pay off the debt hanging over him. Darcy took the bait. Between April 27 and 29, 2023, he made his way to the Peakhurst unit, probably thinking this could be his shot at redemption. But what awaited him inside wasn't business. It was a setup. What happened in that apartment would lead to his death and become one of the most chilling and organized crime scenes NS Dollars police had ever investigated. The murder, a cold and brutal business. The details of what happened inside are still not fully known. What's clear is that Darcy was never meant to leave alive. Fraser and his associate didn't bring him there for a deal. They brought him there to confront him, threaten him, maybe get answers, or simply get rid of him. At some point, things turned violent. Darcy was grabbed from behind, one of them locking him in a chokehold, while the other restrained him. They wrapped duct tape across his mouth and around his face, tight. Maybe they wanted to scare him into talking, or keep him quiet while they decided what to do next. But then, everything spiraled out of control. In the struggle, Darcy started to vomit. With the tape over his mouth and his airway restricted, he couldn't breathe. He choked, and within moments he was gone. 22 years old, dead from asphyxiation after suffocating on his own vomit. It was never supposed to end this way, at least not in that moment. What began as intimidation ended as a killing, sudden, chaotic, and irreversible. Darcy Schafer-Turner was dead, and now the men who'd set him up had a body to hide. The accident nobody reports. This is where the story turns darker. After Darcy's death, the obvious step, calling emergency services, never happened. No one rang 000. No one said, "There's been an accident." Instead, Fraser was left alone in a room with a dead body and a problem he couldn't solve with a phone call. He sent a message. Not to family, not to friends. He reached for Signal, the encrypted messaging app favored by people in that world, and typed a line that seems almost casual given the situation. "There's someone laying the floor my bathroom. In an accident I only to tie up. A body on the bathroom floor, a corpse, and the man on the other end, a contact Fraser knew through online gaming, whose name remains suppressed, had a solution. "Don't panic," he said. "I know someone who handles this. I know a cleaner." Enter the cleaner, Dennis Turnbull Charles Dennis Lemarchand. Turnbull was 33, a Brisbane businessman running an aviation services company out of Brisbane Airport. On paper, he looked like any legitimate entrepreneur, business registrations, tax records, the works. But Turnbull had a second career. He was a fixer, a cleaner, a man who dealt with messes, human messes that had to disappear. When Fraser's associate explained the situation, Turnbull didn't hesitate. "No moral doubts, no, maybe you should call the cops." He booked a flight from Brisbane to Sydney and started preparing for the job. Before even meeting Fraser, he made a list, a shopping list, but one that read like a crime scene cleanup inventory. He knew exactly what he would need. The shopping expedition? Buying a cover-up. Turnbull's first stop in Sydney wasn't Fraser's apartment, it was Bunnings. Among the aisles of cleaning products and hardware, he carefully gathered his tools. Chlorine duct tape gloves, coveralls, cleaning materials, respiratory masks, microfiber cloths, cable ties. Every item was intentional. Chlorine to sanitize and destroy biological traces. Duct tape and cable ties to secure and contain. Protective gear for safety. Microfiber cloths to wipe down surfaces. He wasn't an expert in forensics, but he knew enough to make evidence disappear. Turnbull didn't stop there. On a second trip to Bunnings, he bought something far more crucial, a large metal cabinet. The centerpiece of the disposal plan, the burial site. That wasn't a grave, the metal cabinet was the linchpin of Turnbull's plan. It wasn't just a container, it was a coffin, a way to hold Darcy's body and, in Turnbull's mind, make it disappear forever. Paid for in cash, Turnbull knew exactly what it was for. Back at the Peakhurst unit, he got to work. Surfaces were scrubbed with chlorine and cleaning agents, every trace of biological evidence targeted. Then, with precise efficiency, he wrapped Darcy in layers of black plastic. The wrapping wasn't just practical. It contained fluids, slowed decomposition, destroyed evidence, and made the body easier to move. Once wrapped, Darcy went into the metal cabinet. The cabinet was loaded onto the back of Darcy's own Toyota Hilux ute, turning his vehicle into the vessel for his final journey. The next morning, Turnbull drove north. He didn't sneak or hide. Calmly, he transported the cabinet up the highway to the mid-north coast. Along the way, he even stopped near Port Macquarie to buy a trailer and an aluminum boat through Facebook Marketplace. Whether this was a backup plan or part of his original disposal strategy is unclear, but it shows how calculated he was. The creek, where bodies go to be forgotten. Hours later, Turnbull reached Worrell Creek near Maxville, a remote waterway chosen as the final resting place. When his initial attempt to sink the cabinet failed, a trapped air pocket kept it afloat. He didn't panic. He took a knife, punctured the plastic, released the air, and watched as the cabinet sank. This deliberate action was crucial in court. It wasn't the act of a scared man forced into crime. It was the methodical work of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Someone experienced. After the disposal, Turnbull didn't flee in a panic. He returned to Queensland, still driving Darcy's ute as if nothing had happened. It wasn't until investigators pieced together the evidence later that the full picture came into focus. The investigation. Connecting the dots, Darcy's disappearance didn't go unnoticed. By mid-May, he was reported missing. NSW police, already investigating drug activity in Caringbah, had him on their radar. When he couldn't be found, a missing persons inquiry was launched. Through methodical police work, investigators traced Turnbull's route from Sydney to the mid-north coast, tracked the cabinet's purchase, and pinpointed where it had been dumped, Worrell Creek. On May 12, 2023, divers recovered the cabinet, and inside were Darcy Schafer-Turner's remains. 3 days later, on May 15th, Zachary Richard Fraser was arrested in Peakhurst and charged with murder, later reduced to manslaughter after a guilty plea. On May 17th, NS Dollars detectives moved on Brisbane. Charles Dennis Lemarchand Turnbull was arrested, exposing the full scale of the cleanup operation. Turnbull's extradition to Ness-and-Billons was granted, and by September 2023, he faced formal charges. Accessory after the fact to murder, stealing a motor vehicle, and improperly interfering with a corpse. The price of cover-ups? What the case reveals, here's where the story gets unsettling. Neither Fraser nor Turnbull was hiding from what they had done. Fraser paid Turnbull $20,000 to make Darcy's body disappear, and even threw in ownership of Darcy's ute as a bonus. This was a straight-up transaction, money for a service. No theatrics, no clever criminal enterprise, just a payment for a specialist job in the underworld. And it raises a chilling question about the world they were part of. How many people like Turnbull exist? How many cleaners quietly move between legitimate businesses and the criminal economy, ready to dispose of a problem when called? Police investigations in Sydney suggest the number is far higher than anyone would like to admit. The legal reckoning. Two different paths. Fraser and Turnbull faced very different consequences, even though both played essential roles in Darcy's death and disposal. In October 2025, Zachary Fraser appeared before Justice Nicholas Chen in the Dallas Supreme Court. He had pleaded guilty to manslaughter, a significant reduction from the original murder charge. The court heard about Fraser's mental health struggles, PTSD, depression, and dependent personality disorder. His defense argued he was subordinate in the situation, pressured into a crime by a stronger personality, and that the act was essentially spontaneous. Justice Chen acknowledged these factors, but still held Fraser accountable. He was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison for manslaughter, with a 25% reduction for his early guilty plea and remorse, as well as consideration for his minimal criminal history. His non-parole period was set at just over 4 years, making him eligible for parole in July 2027, factoring in time already served. Charles Dennis Lemarchand Turnbull faced sentencing later, and it revealed even more about how the law treats someone who methodically disposes of a body. In December 2024, Justice Grant Brady handed him 3 years and 3 months in prison, with parole eligibility after 2 years. What stood out in Turnbull's case was the judge's reasoning. Justice Brady rejected the idea that Turnbull had been coerced or afraid. He highlighted Turnbull's careful, methodical actions, especially puncturing the plastic to sink the cabinet, as proof that he knew exactly what he was doing. While the offender's actions might be characterized as limited, their significance was undeniably apparent, the judge said. In other words, Turnbull wasn't a scared man caught up in events. He was a professional executing a plan with full awareness of the consequences. The victim, a life reduced to a problem amid all the shopping lists, metal cabinets and court hearings. It's easy to forget who Darcy Schafer-Turner really was. To the justice system, he became a case number, a body in a creek, a victim in legal proceedings. But to his family, he was far more than that. His mother described him as a son with an adventurous spirit and a promising future. His sister Yasmin shared her heartbreak on social media. "Darcy, I can't believe you're gone. My heart has shattered into a million pieces. I love you so much." In court, he was described as unconditionally loved by his family. He was 22, full of dreams, humor, and compassion. Yes, he made choices that put him in danger. His involvement with drugs, his associations with risky people. But none of that meant he deserved to die. When his mother, Carla, delivered her victim impact statement, she captured the truth of what justice could never fully fix. For Turnbull, this might be a prison sentence. But for our family, it's a lifetime sentence of pain. The broader context, what this case represents. The murder of Darcy Schafer-Turner reveals something fundamental about organized crime in Australia. It's not just flashy shootouts or high-tech schemes. A huge part of it is about moving bodies, covering up tracks, and making problems disappear. That's where men like Turnbull come in. They are the infrastructure of the underworld. Specialists who make crime work by erasing its consequences. Every murder that needs a cover-up creates demand for a cleaner. Every missing body creates a market for these services. The case also exposes how legitimate businesses and organized crime overlap. Turnbull ran an aviation company. He existed in the formal economy. But he also operated in the shadows, ready for work that couldn't appear on any legal ledger. Since Darcy's death, Sydney's gang activity has intensified. The body disposal business, in particular, has become more active. The case sits at the intersection of all this, not a headline-grabbing organized crime saga, but a chilling demonstration of how the criminal underworld actually functions. What remains unresolved? Even with convictions and sentencing, questions remain. The third man, the one who held Darcy in the chokehold and was believed responsible for the immediate cause of death, remains unnamed for legal reasons. Some reports suggest he fled Australia, possibly to Germany, evading prosecution entirely. If true, it highlights the transnational nature of organized crime, how perpetrators can cross borders and avoid justice, and how the system's reach is limited by geography. Darcy remains dead. His family remains shattered. And somewhere, other cleaners, other men like Turnbull are still available, ready to do the work no one else will. This isn't a story of sophisticated criminal plots. It's worse. It's about ordinary young men whose debts became death sentences, and men willing to make those problems vanish for a price. It's a stark reminder that real-life crime isn't always about genius schemes or master criminals. Sometimes it's about desperation, opportunity, and a system of invisible facilitators that make the darkest acts possible.